Now, we're about to talk about Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC. But first, Dee, I want to kind of talk about another point, and that's, in the next 10 years, could we see a college football draft with the NIL and these conference realignments? If we do get to one or two conferences, or even conferences decide to, or the NCAA decides to, just level it out as a league, man for man, team for team, and you get a commissioner and you kind of set it up as like a pro platform, which by in no shape or form do I think that is a good idea. I think that would totally destroy college sports, but it's a possibility that we have to keep in the back of our minds. So with that being said, is it possible to have a college football draft? Is it possible for recruiting to go away, or maybe just minimal? Maybe you have 20 to 30 guys that you recruit, and after that, you start drafting players. Dee, what are your thoughts on something like that happening in the next 10, 15 years?
I think that it would be difficult to do. As far as like, I feel like that there is the pool isn't. I mean, there are a lot of players in college football that are eligible to be drafted, but I feel like high school, it's even more. And I feel like there will be so many logistical issues, I feel like, for you to have a draft. And, you're not necessarily paying players. They can profit off of their image and likeness and their name, but you're not necessarily paying players. So you're not coming in and signing a contract. So it'll be kind of tough to tell a kid, you have to go here. If you get drafted there, because like I said, you're not necessarily signing a contract with the school. Now, if we start talking about them being paid by the school, then yeah, I could definitely see something like that happening. But overall, I don't see it happening in the near future. But it's something that is definitely an interesting topic of conversation.
Well, indeed, just to add to it real quick, and then we'll move on. The reason I bring that up is because when you talk about these, and not everyone's going to make the same amount of money, right? There's going to be some guys that just make a couple of thousand, but then you're going to have people that possibly even someone like Arch Manning, nephew of Peyton Manning, that could make tens of millions of dollars, right, by the end of his college career. And by that point, how are you going to tell a kid that's making that kind of money to go to Spanish 101, to go to communications 101, to go to biology classes? It's becoming so much about the money and so less about the education. And that's why I bring up the possibility of a draft happening. We shall see. I don't know, but that's just my basis on it. That's my belief. You let us know what you think down in the comments. But for now, we're going to move on to the next topic, and that is Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC. Now, Dee and I are a little bit late reporting this news. As most of y'all know, this happened last week. But we think it's an important topic to talk about. And Dee, as I mentioned just a second ago, the conference realignment, we heard rumors of Clemson and FSU possibly joining the SEC. I don't think that's going to happen. But Dee, give me your thoughts overall about this conference realignment and what you think about Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC and how that changes the dynamic for not only the SEC, but all Power 5 conferences.
Well, first of all, for the SEC, huge. I mean, like, you had the brands of Texas, you had the brands of Oklahoma, to that conference that's already, really, really powerful, to begin with. I think that it will be very, very difficult for another conference to really compete with that. You'll start seeing, if you keep the current format, or even if you do expand the college football format, you'll see a lot of teams that are in the SEC get in. You'll see so many teams, and I think that would be an issue for a lot of conferences. They're like, I don't want to expand and see 8 SEC teams in, because now you got Texas and Oklahoma, and they're such big brands and such good football teams. And so, so for the SEC, it would be great. For other conferences, obviously not great at all. Not great for the Big 12. Not great at all. The Big 12 is not looking very strong. That's their two most powerful brands. That's their two most profitable brands, and the brands that everybody knows. And so if you lose those two, that's huge. And so I think that the other conferences are going to have to make some moves and either join forces, or something, because that's huge news for the SEC, and for the other conferences, that's not good news.
Yeah, and do you bring up an interesting point when you talk about the Big 12? There's no doubt the SEC wins at the end of the day. They get Texas and Oklahoma, two of the biggest brands in all of college football. You could debate teams like Alabama and Georgia and Florida and LSU have huge fan bases, and they do. They're up there. But even with Texas not being relevant in the most recent years, their fan base and their legacy is one of the strongest in all of college football. So for the SEC, it's a major win. And you could definitely see, like you said, Texas and Oklahoma joining Georgia and Alabama and Florida and maybe a few other teams in the SEC and the expanded playoff, because I think we're heading that way. We'll discuss that further in another video. But my main focus is the Big 10, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 and how it affects them. We've seen a lot of speculation about various teams from the Big 12 joining with the Pac-12, such as TCU and Baylor and Texas Tech going out west to the Pac-12. We've seen a couple of teams like Iowa State and I think Texas Tech joining the Big 10. Or West Virginia and Notre Dame joining the ACC. I forgot to mention the ACC as well, because this could affect them. But I think the ACC will be fine. I think if the ACC adds Notre Dame, they're going to be just fine. FSU is a great program that's back on the rise under Mike Norvell. North Carolina is strong under Mac Brown right now. And, of course, Clemson is Clemson. So the ACC will be fine. My biggest concern would be for the Pac-12 and the Big 12. Big 10 has Ohio State, Wisconsin, and Michigan. But what are your thoughts about this idea? My opinion is, if the Big 12 wants to keep their conference alive, and I don't know how the contracts work out, but what if they brought teams like Nebraska and Iowa to the Big 12? When you think about the Nebraska Cornhuskers and the Iowa Hawkeyes, you think of big, meaty, corn-fed linemen, right? And that just breathes Big 12. And to me, yes, they're not Texas and Oklahoma. Yes, they never will be. But you've got Nebraska and Iowa, and then you have Iowa and Iowa State to play in-conference, in-state rival. So what are your thoughts on that? Nebraska and Iowa, in my opinion, don't stand a chance against teams like Michigan, Ohio State, Wisconsin. So why wouldn't they want to go join forces with another conference that still is a Power 5 conference, even without Texas and Oklahoma, and have a chance to get into this expanded playoff?
Yeah, I think that those are two, pretty good brands. I think Nebraska has pretty good tradition. They haven't really won anything lately, but they do have great tradition. The Big 12 is definitely going to need to be scrambling for some teams. I think that adding those two teams would be great. But, it's just really tough losing your two top brands, man. I just keep thinking about how big that is, and how, crazy that news was when I first heard it. And we talked about it, it's monumental, news. And even, when you think about those teams in Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC, you think about the East getting stronger and the West, because one team will go to the East and one team will go to the West, regardless of which team goes where. That side of the conference still gets stronger. And so you either add Texas to a already LSU, Alabama, Auburn, you add them to that side, or you add, Texas or Oklahoma to a Georgia, Florida side. Like man, I'm out of words, talking about how huge, that pickup will be.
Yeah, indeed. I guess that brings me to one of the last questions I have is, with the addition of Texas and Oklahoma, what does that do for these mid-tier teams like Mississippi State and Ole Miss and Missouri and Arkansas and South Carolina? These are teams that have fed on winning a couple upset games a year, and also, being pretty steady in a 7 to 9 win season and getting that bowl bid. Now you bring Texas and Oklahoma into the mix, and you're looking at, even with coaches like Mike Leach at Mississippi State and Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, it's going to be tough to even pull out 5 wins, much less try to recruit 4 and 5-star guys away from these top tier teams that are entering your conference. What does this do for the FCC for these teams?
Yeah, for the teams that aren't necessarily considered top tier teams, it will be more difficult, but I think it was difficult already. I think that, sometimes you do have, I think what'll still happen is, like, sometimes you'll still have a Mississippi State, team, win 8 games or so, 9 games or so, you'll have an Ole Miss, they have Lane Kiffin's a great offensive mind. So they might be able to upset some teams. They're just going to have to really, up what they're doing, up their play. And what we spoke about earlier, in this episode, the NIL deals might help, it might help the mid-tier teams, because you might have, guys that aren't these huge companies, like Amazon or like Dr. Pepper or something, aren't huge brands. You might have, smaller brands come in and say, we're gonna try to get a deal with like a mid-tier college like Ole Miss. And then, you might have a recruit sign there because he wants to get this, money whenever he signs there. So, it might, it's going to be tough. I think it's always going to be tough for teams like that, because it's so, college football is so top heavy. But I still think that they're always going to be able to find a way to compete. I think at the end of the day, it'll be tough, like I said, but I think that hopefully, at least I think that's just my heart speaking. I hope that they're able to, find a way to, continue to maybe get an upset win, because that's what makes, college football great, at times when you get upset wins and upset victories. So, hopefully that'll continue to happen, and, just conference realignment doesn't necessarily change that. So.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, only time will tell. But we're really looking forward to this season. That's a wrap for today. When we come back next week, we're going to start discussing our top 3 teams per conference. And yes, we're starting off with one of the best in the country, that being the SEC. So get ready and stay tuned. College football is right around the corner. Be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, subscribe down below, and click the bell for your notifications when we post new videos, because it's about to get serious. Until next time, this is Nate Dogg and Devonair D. Jackson signing off.